as long as no one takes it personally, none of our friends, because it wasn't meant personally. Okay, so here's the story. The Ramban tells us a reality, which is as follows. The Ramban says that Eretz Yisrael is controlled by Hashem, while the other lands, says the Ramban, have Sarim, Malachim, that control them, manage them. The Moshel. I want to see if the Ramban uses that word. Moshel. The Moshel on it. They rule. So there are angels that rule on the other lands besides for Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, one who lives in outside of Eretz Yisrael is Ovid Elohim Acherim, because things in the other lands are mediated through these Sarim, through these angels. And the Ramban furthermore says that once upon a time, the ancient nations used to worship their particular Sar because they knew. The Ramban makes the point about they knew who their Sar was. Their Avodah Zarah was also sophisticated back in the day, the ancient Avodah Zarah. Like, we don't know anymore, we can't define it, but they once upon a time, they each nation knew what his Sar was, and that's why they worshipped it. And back to the Ramban, sort of, just parenthetically, the Ramban is basically... the Ramban is basically acknowledges that Avodah Zarah is if you're not in Eretz Yisrael, then in a certain sense Avodah Zarah is appropriate. Appropriate because you have a Sar, and the Sar actually does mediate, does control. It's Moshel. Ramban uses the word Moshel, rules over that land. But that means that what's demanded from the non-Jews, who are expected obviously not to be Avodah Zarah and pain of death, is that they're supposed to make themselves connected to Klal Yisrael. In as much as they're not connected to Klal Yisrael and the bona fide rachik from Eretz Yisrael and rachik from Klal Yisrael, then Avodah Zarah is completely makes sense.
Why is there that expectation, though?
So why is there that expectation? Because it's better. Because serving Hashem is more true than serving the Sar. Now, so let's talk about that. So we have to figure out. Like this. We have to figure out there's two things we're going to talk about. What does the Ramban mean? What are the ramifications of this practically? What does this mean actually? And specifically, which is the title of this year, is this true today? Okay? And should we do anything about it? Why should we care about it? What does the Ramban mean? Is it still true? And why should we care about it? So first I want to tell you what the Ramban means, but there's something else which will be masber. This is a shir I gave. You can find it in the series about Eretz Yisrael. I gave a whole shir about this point. But this Ramban, along with a chidah, which says an amazing thing. A chidah says that any Torah and mitzvahs that a person does outside of Eretz Yisrael is mahane, gives pleasure to the Sar, to the God / angel, minister, whatever you want to call it, that's Moshel on that land. And that's why it's Kavod Avodah Zarah, because you're literally giving him pleasure, literally, figuratively, whatever the mashal means, we'll understand, giving pleasure to a Sar. So you're doing something for another God. Only in Eretz Yisrael are you giving hana, complete hana to Hashem. Okay? So let's first explain what this means, and then let's talk about the main focus of this year, which is the mitzvah today. But I want to give you some background what the Ramban means. Like I said, I have it's written in my sefer and the shurim about this.
What's the problem with giving these Sarim? I'm saying it's
right.
the problem with
Who cares?
Zarah that you're giving them.
Yeah, okay, but who cares? But it goes back to the other question: why is that a problem, right? Yeah, but it's Kavod Avodah Zarah. It is Kavod Avodah Zarah. The Gemara says it's Kavod Avodah Zarah. The Chidah says it's Kavod Avodah Zarah because you are advancing his cause. You're giving him pleasure. The Sar.
And that's the Bayah of Avodah Zarah?
Yes. So let's talk about this. So what does the Ramban mean? Why is it like Avodah Zarah? And the other question, why are Goyim expected to reject this? Why is it a problem? So,
Sar is like a malach, right?
yeah, Sar is a malach. Yeah, the Ramban calls it malach. Malach Elim. calls it Tzorim, he calls it Malachim, he calls it Moshlim, he calls it Koiches. It has to do with Koichavim and Mazalas also.
Well, normally, if you daven into Mal, it's not about desire, is it? Or maybe
That's a question. It's a big question about that. As an intermediary, that's a whole shayla.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk about what this means. What does it mean that Eretz Yisrael is completely in the control of Hashem and other lands are mediated by these malachim? There's something we call the Derech Hashem, or the Midas of Hashem. The Derech Hashem, the description of Hashem's anhaga, we can call that Chesed Mishput Tzedakah, as the Navi calls it. You can call it Chesed and Rachamim. You can talk about 10 spheres. There's all different ways to talk about There's all different ways to talk about, to categorize, and to think about the anhaga of Hashem. And the anhaga of Hashem means, what does it mean simply? It means understanding what happens, understanding everything that happens in the correct way, understanding what happens, what it's supposed to reflect, what's going on in the world. That's understanding the Derech Hashem. That's understanding the Derech Hashem. Which means that, as the Rambam says and others, that we understand Hashem. In order to understand Hashem, we understand Hashem through His actions. By experiencing what we experience, we get Das Hashem. We get Das Hashem. We attain Das Hashem. So when a person has certain experiences in life, that's where he gets a sense of what Hashem is, through his experiences. So let's say a person has experiences that are skewed to one midah of Hashem. Imagine a person would only experience chesed, never experience mishpat, never experience tzedek, whatever those midas mean. We don't have to get into it. But the point is, life is full of different things that happen. If a person would have a very specific kind of life experience, personally, so he's not going to know Hashem, because he's going to have a certain sense of what Hashem is all about.
Only insofar as we're very empirical about it, right?
What do you mean?
Meaning, experience is something that's definitely subject to vary from person to person, but
Right.
Logic and reason, that's here equally accessible to everyone.
Correct. So here's where we talk right now. So what we're talking about now is I'm basically asserting over here. This is a very important idea, which I'm really not planning on going into, but I knew you would ask this. That I'm focusing on history and experience as being the means by which we know Hashem. And Shmuli's question is, well, can't we know Hashem by thinking and by studying and by proving? So it's a good question. But taking Tanakh, taking the Torah says we know Hashem through Yetzias Mitzrayim. Yodu Keni Hashem. Where does Hashem reveal Himself to us? Yetzias Mitzrayim. The events of Yetzias Mitzrayim is revelation. It's our relation to Hashem. The Torah, at least once upon a time. And this we have. This gets to the broader question of whether history still talks to us, whether our history still talks to us in terms of Hashem. But taking the Torah and how does Hashem reveal Himself to us in the Torah? Through experience. Through experience. You experience Geula. You experience that, okay, the good guys are redeemed from slavery and the bad guys are punished. And now you know Hashem. Well, again, what does it mean you know Hashem? Now you understand the truth of what Hashem and His actions are all about. But what if you would have a different experience? Let's say your experience would be that the bad guys flourish and the good guys suffer. So you wouldn't be able to know Hashem if that's all you experienced. If your whole life,
That's your personal experience.
right? Personal experience. Now we're talking about personal experience. What?
Seeing other people's experiences and knowing that it doesn't do anything.
Right, okay, so that's what I'm saying. So now we're talking about personal
That's
experience.
cool.
Now, of course, there's also a public experience, a social experience, a national experience. But it's always good to think about the extremes, right? Let's think about the extremes. Let's say you would have no exposure to the midah of tzedek, to the midah of mishpat. So your God would be chesed, meaning that you'd only understand that as a God, as the most essential being. And you could have a world which is only chesed, there's no mishpat, no din. It's possible. Such a mitzias. If someone happened to have a life experience, we never experienced din. No matter what he did, there were no consequences. No one ever suffered, whatever. Fine. So let's say a person would have that experience in this world. As we know. But the world, as you know, it is not only chesed. But what if a person would happen to have only chesed in his life? He wouldn't know Hashem. Right? Unless he would somehow be able to transcend experience and think purely without being influenced by experience. So that's the question Shmuley was raising. How important is experience? But for now, and it's a very, very important question. for the whole topic that we're trying to study here. But for now, at least we can assume that our introduction to Hashem, the reason why we care to find Hashem, what motivates us to look for Hashem even through thought, is the fact that once upon a time we had an experience of Hashem, which inspired us to believe, to recognize Hashem as being what He is, as in His midas, and therefore being very important for us to understand. So in other words, what I'm saying for now, the question is, yes, today we can think about Hashem, but why are we learning about Hashem, me and you, today? Because once upon a time we went out of Mitzrayim, and because we went out of Mitzrayim, therefore we are now motivated to not only experience Hashem sometimes, we don't experience Him, but even to think about Him when we're not experiencing Him. What? What's your question?
No, I guess I'm just curious if that's the only thing that can cause us to think this, or this is just somewhat circumstantial.
Yeah, I mean,
see, other people definitely thought about God, maybe in the wrong ways, maybe in the right ones, but without having this prior experience.
Right. Okay. We get to the broader question of Avram Avinu as opposed to. There's always like two steps in Klal Yisrael, right? There's Avram Avinu, discovered what he did, and then there's Yetzias Mitzrayim / Moshe Rabbeinu. So what is the relationship there? You know, here I'm talking about Yetzias Mitzrayim as being our relationship with Hashem. What about Avram Avinu? But that has to do with this whole attention. But this whole, you have to understand what are these 2 points in Jewish history, or what we're all about. Are we about Avram Avinu, or are we about Yetzias Mitzrayim? Right? And if Avram Avinu is about his own search, his own discovery, then that suggests maybe there's another way to do things. But I'm talking about Yetzias Mitzrayim as described in the Torah, that Yetzias Mitzrayim is what's going to teach Hashem to us as a people. V'yadu ki ani Hashem is through experience. Not v'yadu ki ani Hashem because they're going to find me. V'yadu ki ani Hashem, they're going to experience me.
Right, they really knew about God before Yetzias Mitzrayim in some ways,
right?
Just not others.
Right.
Isn't this the whole purpose of this whole series? The disconnect between these abstract ideas and
experience.
That's the whole purpose of the whole series.
Yeah. So you wonder why I'm not answering his question more?
Yeah.
Because it's not up to me.
That's a question, but this is really the first week already.
Yes.
That, I'm supposed to have a certain thing. I know the abstract idea. Why don't I want to live in Eretz Yisrael?
Right. Okay, so we're going to get closer. Today we're going to talk about experience. Okay, we are going to talk about a lot of experience today in the 20th century, even in the 21st century. Okay, we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. Don't worry. Okay. Good. 1 second. You're Rosenberg, right? Good. Because we need you. We need you for the shit. I thought you were. I never met you. I never met you personally, right? Good. Okay. Good. So that's what it means. So we have Das Hashem through history. And through a very specific history, a very specific story, which we maintain that story is what's necessary, what's important for us to base our relationship with Hashem on that story. Our basic Das Hashem. We can then get sophisticated and think about it in more philosophical ways, but our first exposure to Hashem, and the thing that constantly draws us back and makes us think about it, is Yetzias Mitzrayim. Yetzias Mitzrayim means Geula. It doesn't just mean Yetzias Mitzrayim, it means Geula, which culminates in Vavesi Oisam B'La'aretz. So it doesn't just mean the act of Yetzias Mitzrayim. It means Yetzias Mitzrayim, V'Hamas Mashech, going to Eretz Yisrael and being redeemed, being in the state of redemption, being in the state of what we call tzaddik v'toivlei, where the good things are happening, and as we deserve. So that's Das Hashem. The Medrash Nasi says, what's Das? Hamakir es boirei. Hamakir es boirei, to have a familiarity with Hashem. So the history of Klal Yisrael is so designed, right? The Tanakh is a history book. It's a history. It's a story of events. The events of Klal Yisrael, the history and the story of Klal Yisrael is so designed so that Klal Yisrael should have Das Hashem. Now, there's a million other stories in the world. The stories of every nation has this story. So every nation, according to the nature of their story, according to their particular experiences, how it was colored, what their founding story is all about, what their essence is about, what their character is about, is going to have a different sense of divinity, of what Hashem is, what God is. So when the Ramban says the other nations have a sar, what that means is linyanenu. What that means is that they have what we can call, let's say, a fraction of Hashem. You can think about a malach in a crude way. You could say, okay, every malach is obviously, if he's divine, so he's part of Hashem. Of course, Hashem is not part. I'm not getting into metaphysics now, but just in a sense, as a mashal. So do they have a God? Do they have a shaykhus to Hashem? They have a shaykhus to Hashem because they have a certain angle on Hashem. But because they have a certain angle on Hashem, they don't have the whole picture. So the oived Elohim acher. In other words, their sense of God is skewed. It's corrupted. One of them's God might be all about chesed. The other one's God might be all about tzedek. The other one's God might be all about mishpat. You could have 70 gods. You could have 70 midas. And based on all these different kinds of midas and different kinds of nefesh, people have different sense of what's the most absolute true thing, and therefore what's worthy of worship, what their lives are all about, which is what their God is. That's what it means, simple, what the Ramban is saying, that Eretz Yisrael, meaning the story of Klal Yisrael in its land, the story of Klal Yisrael is the story of revealing the shleimus of the Darchei Hashem. In other words, let's think about this. What really are the Darchei Hashem? Let's say I knew everything. Let's say I experienced everything in history. Everything in the universe, everything in the past, present, and future b'shleimus. Then I would know the Darchei Hashem by definition. As long as I could categorize it.
What are the qualifiers of, let's say, experience that's not, let's say, experience with thinking? Saying certain experiences are modified by the fact that we think a certain way.
Well, we don't experience without thinking. Every experience has is theory laden, yes.
Right.
We don't just experience without thinking.
To what extent is this, are all experiences maybe appropriately be conceived when the truth is known at the onset? And to what extent can certain experiences impart correct thinking?
Yeah.
Let's say, labor being done by the thinker.
See, I don't know. And I don't see why that's important here. Because the fact is that
well, like
a story affects us.
It's somewhat fractal, right? That I'm dimensionally lacking in my experience.
Yeah, every experience is fractal because we only have a sliver. Everyone has a sliver.
Right,
even
but
so.
Understanding the partiality of that experience requires other experiences, or maybe just thought.
But thought tells me that it's partial. What do you mean? I know that it's partial, right? Basically, it's like this: we want to know what's going on in the world. Everyone wants to know what's going on, which means we want to know Hashem. We want to know Darchei Hashem. But everyone only has access to some information, which is their own experience, their nation's experience, the story, right? At most, you could have whatever, the human experience. But say that, but everyone has directly knows something. If there's a story in the world that accurately reflects the totality of Darchei Hashem, that's called the story of Gilui. That's revelation, and that's what Yechezkel Levenstein is supposed to be. Yechezkel Levenstein says this story stands as a proper reflection of Darchei Hashem. You learn the story properly, you won't go wrong. But if you picked another story, any other story, let's say I'll say I want to study the story of the Poles, I don't know, whatever. Okay, of the Brazilians. Let's keep things whatever, away from the Jews. I want to study the story of the Indians, the Native Americans. So you study the story. It's also Darchei Hashem. Everything is Darchei Hashem. But if that's your whole, if all you're thinking about Hashem is that's what I'm going to talk about every year, once a year I'm going to sit and talk about that story and say, what can we learn from this story? And how you can learn from the story? You can learn from everything in the world. Everything in the world is Hashem's actions. But if you're only going to figure out what you can learn from that story, and that's going to be your only exposure to Hashem, you're going to misunderstand Hashem. And that's why it doesn't say Ani Hashem Asher brought the Indians out of whatever. Okay.
Just Yechezkel Levenstein or whole Jewish history?
No, I think so. The whole Jewish. Okay, so now we talk about the whole Jewish history. We have to figure out we talk about, and this is a very important question. We talk about Jewish history. We talk about times of Gilui. We talk about times of Hester, right? And what does that mean? Gilui and Hester. Gilui and Hester means there are times where what's happening is useful information for understanding Hashem, and there are times where it's actually detrimental for understanding Hashem. The opposite, right? That if you look at it, you'll misunderstand Hashem. That's what Hester means. So now the question of when is it Gilui and when is it Hester and how do I know? It's a very, very important question, right?
What's the difference between Hester and Enough?
I don't know. Is there a difference?
No. So then, if that would be the case.
Oh no! Because you can have Charoy Naf, which is Gilui. No, you can have Charoy Naf, which is Gilui, meaning Rasha v'Raloi is Gilui, Rasha v'Toivloi or Tzadik v'Raloi is Hester.
Unless
right?
it's for a certain lineage.
What?
Unless it's for a certain lineage that we don't know.
No, that's Hester, right? We don't know, right? That's called Tzadik v'Raloi. Tzadik v'Raloi, meaning it doesn't. Tzadik v'Raloi means everything I know, I can't explain this. And Rasha v'Toivloi is the same thing. That's also Hester. But Rasha v'Raloi, person doesn't have averah and he gets punished and he understands why he's getting punished. That's Gilui.
So Galus is left after Hester. If the Navi says Galus came for Averas, that would be also Gilui.
I think Galus is be'etzim associated with Hester.
If we're saying Charoy Naf is form of a gilui.
Yeah, but Golos is... But that's not what Golos is. Golos is not... Golos is that there's going to be a matzah of Hester, I think. I don't think Golos is just a punishment. I think Golos, by definition, means that things are not clear. I think those two things go together, just like Nevuah goes together with Eretz Yisrael. What are you getting at? You getting at something?
No, just saying this point that if a Navi says that if you don't do tshuva, there's going to be a charbon.
Right.
The charbon coming based on the words of a Navi is a gilui. Enough.
Yes. Yeah. Certainly. Right. Certainly.
Maybe
The question is the totality and the
maybe this Hester.
Right, and what's subsequent? Stati Panamehem is obviously Hester.
Yeah, but even that's what I'm saying. That you could get mixed up when you're saying you're starting.
Yeah.
That's a einish.
Right,
so
right,
that would be a gilui.
Right. So the fact that there is a Hester is a gilui, but within the Hester, don't look at pratim. The pratim within the Hester are not megal anything.
Right.
That could be.
So by Hester, do you mean when things aren't going correctly?
Yeah. Hester means when things when you can't make sense out of things. Hester means when a tzaddik, when a pure mind, who's royal to be a navi, someone who's able to think
The world
as
that
Hashem
functions,
does,
should function.
it still won't make sense to him. Right.
It's very simple. We have a good guy that's suffering.
Yeah, tzaddik rally. Tzaddik rally, tzaddik v'tovim.
Simple Jew that's a good guy.
Exactly.
What did he do?
Tzaddik v'tovim, that's the way the question's always expressed. The best way to express the question. Okay. And again, I think I mentioned this before. Moshe Rabbeinu never asked me why tzaddik rally. He asked me why is sometimes tzaddik v'tovim and sometimes tzaddik rally. The people who ask that we should understand Hashem's ways, who says we should understand Hashem's ways? Why do we think we're supposed to understand Hashem's ways? Oh, because sometimes it's tzaddik v'tovim. And that means, we're asserting, that sometimes Hashem deliberately acts in a way that's toiv, and we can understand as toiv. And then we want to know, well, why is there sometimes tzaddik toiv and sometimes tzaddik v'toiv? What governs that? Because if we don't know what governs that, then we're never going to know how to interpret anything. We're never be able to work in the world. So that's very one of the most important Gemara is understanding Dachi Hashem. And if it's not what the most Teretz says, whatever, it gets very complicated.
So the distinction is not good and bad. The distinction is when it's appropriately good or appropriately
Exactly, right.
good or bad.
Right.
You wouldn't have a problem with Rosh Hashanah.
Again, only why is it sometimes Rosh Hashanah or sometimes Rosh Hashanah, right? In and of itself.
But Rosh Hashanah wouldn't have a problem with?
No, Rosh Hashanah means the Rosh suffering.
Maybe he suffers because of this Hester. Like maybe you could say Hester is the fact that he suffered. That is what Hester is. You could just do the same thing with Ra, just in general Ra.
Well, it's Hester from his perspective. No, Rosh Hashanah from the perspective of a Navi is exactly is what's supposed to be happening. No, Rosh Hashanah from the perspective of a Navi is that everything is happening as it's supposed to be happening because of a Hester.
No,
that's not. That's an oxymoron. What's supposed to be happening means gilui. That's what gilui means.
That's you defining it.
Yeah.
So you could say that each play out with one more purposefully than the other one.
Which one? What do you mean more purposefully?
That Toivis is the world working as it should because you're working as it should, and Ra is the world not working as it should because you're not acting as you should. So it's but
you're looking from the Rosh's perspective. I don't think we really care about it from his perspective. Right? The question of Rosh Hashanah is from our perspective. What do
we have a question why the world's working for him when he does good. That's the point. Why does he work for him if he's not acting correctly?
The Russia, right?
Yeah.
Why is it Toivla, right?
Toivla, yeah.
So why is Pari successful, right? No one asks why is Pari drowning in the Yamsuf. Pari might have asked that. Whatever, say that. I don't know. He doesn't understand anything. Fine. But we don't ask why is Pari suffering the Yamsuf. Then it makes sense.
But why do you say
we ask Manavshach. We ask Manavshach. If Hashem wanted to redeem us from and Taka, there's a question. Hashem wanted to redeem us from Mitzrayim. Why did he put us in Mitzrayim? Everyone's so excited Hashem redeemed us from Mitzrayim. Hashem also put us in Mitzrayim. That's the kasha. Meaning, you say that you can't be all excited because there's also mitzvah tzaddik. You have to have a theory, a super theory of why sometimes it's sometimes that. I'm not going into it.
If it was always tzaddik rally, then we would just say we can't understand.
Yeah, we say Hashem's operating on a different realm than us. But here we assert that the fact that we can sometimes understand the way of Hashem is deliberate. Hashem wants us to understand Him, right? He wants us to be cholich b'drachav and know Him, be makir Him. That's Hashem. The whole Torah is about that. Ki yidativ l'manish yitzav esbonav v'zvisol Hashem who's derech Hashem. Last is Torah Mishra. Avram Avinu teaches the world of derech Hashem. Mahu afato. Mahu afato, right? You say Mahu afato, just like Hashem is rachum, you should be chana. But then we don't say just like Hashem makes tsunamis and kills 100,000 babies. We should also do that. We say, we don't versteht nicht, right? So okay, but then why do you assume you understand anything? Must be that there's some theory of why sometimes it's understandable, sometimes not. What that is not in the name, not important.
Goals is on Tzaddik.
Yeah, and Rosh Hashanah. Yeah.
So Tzaddik is a form of Einish. Could be used as an
No, it's not an einish because it's not understandable. It's not an einish. He doesn't deserve it. If he deserved it, he wouldn't be tzaddik Rala. Moshe Rabbeinu wouldn't have asked, "Why don't be maish tzaddik Rala?" He deserves it. The kasha is he doesn't deserve it. It happens when he doesn't deserve it. Understand?
Goals is einish?
One second. What? Mibnei maish tzaddik Rala means we're talking about a tzaddik who doesn't deserve to suffer, and yet he suffers.
Okay, so now back to goals.
Yeah. So I'm saying Golas is tzaddik Rala, right? You're saying I Golas is an einish.
Yeah.
I mean, how can I say tzaddik? Okay.
We told us before because
It's the same question, right? Same question.
No, I'm just.
So that's the same question. That Golas is not Hester. Golas is Rosh of a rabbi.
Right.
Yeah. Say this. So I'm telling you like this. I'm telling you that Golas is. Okay, we don't have to go into so much. I don't think it's going to get to our shir. No, that Golas is an einish. The einish is that there's going to be Hester. The einish is that even that after this Golas, you can still be a tzaddik. It's not going to help.
Understand why sometimes tzaddik Rala is tzaddik.
Why?
Because when they're worried for einish based on Isa.
When is the tzaddik punished to become a tzaddik Rala? Understand?
You can have einish. You can have.
Yeah, Nachum Gamzo was a tzaddik v'toivla. You know how I know? Because he said Gamzo Toiv, right? He's the one who said Gamzo Toiv. Everything is Toiv. And he said, and he was full of the biggest Yisurin. That's the story in Tainus. The Gemara goes like this. Right, he deserved it. 1 second. It's a major thing. It's a very important Gemara. Because the Gemara goes like this. He told his Talmidim, everyone knows how he looked, and he told his Talmidim, take me out of the house. You know, the house was rickety. Take me out because it's not going to fall down because I'm here. So they said, so why do you look the way you do? So he told him the story with the onion. Now, what does it mean, because the answer to is tzaddik gomer, tzaddik she'ena gomer. That's the answer, whatever that means. Nachum Gamzu, since he knew that nothing bad is going to happen to him, that means he's tzaddik b'toivloi. Because he knows that he's not going to suffer. So he's a tzaddik gomer. So he's a tzaddik gomer, so why has this happened? The Teretz says, because this was also toiv. It was toiv, because he knew exactly why he deserved it. Ad kedei kach, that he brought it upon himself. I mean, he understands that this is exactly what he's right for, and for him this is toiv. Okay, but the point is that suffering and Ra are not synonymous.
It's Gili of the Hashem Who is also toiv.
Correct. But that's when you understand it.
Yeah.
But if the Anhaga is, we're going to put you in a matzav where you cease to understand things, where there won't be nevuah. So maybe yes, the fact that you don't have nevuah, maybe in a bigger life, and you could say we understand why we deserve not to have nevuah. But lamaisa, right now we go through life without das Hashem, and we have a question: how does Hashem? Hashem sometimes wants to have das Hashem, sometimes doesn't. Sometimes he wants to have das Hashem, and therefore, even if we get a punishment, right? Back to you asking. Sometimes, since Hashem wants to have das Hashem, he does like Nachum Gamzu. That Nachum Gamzu is still a das Hashem. What does it mean he's still a das Hashem? He knew exactly what Hashem is going to do and what he's not going to do. Right? That's what he knew. He predicted what Hashem is up to. Hashem's not going to let the house fall on me. Why? Because that I don't deserve. Also, you understand Hashem? Yes, you understand Hashem again. So there's different types of punishments. The type of punishment where you lose das Hashem, the type of punishment you don't lose das Hashem, and that's the question. Okay. So,
I'm just sorry if it's maybe a little bit of a broken record. I'm just still trying to understand this, like the idea that, let's say, fluctuations in experience and it being dimensional is somehow, I guess, meaning if we see, let's say, a certain experience as being the raw material of, let's say, thinking, right? Do we have a way of, let's say, understanding, like, to what extent this has sway, or why we might
experience?
Yeah.
Yeah, by studying psychology. You're asking how does experience influence people, and does it have to?
A lot of this on the idea that there's, let's say, certain circumstances of tzaddik v'rala in Rosh Hashanah, right? And sometimes it is functioning properly. To what extent are we locating this in, let's say, moral facts about the world, and to what extent are we saying that these are just, human, people able to know God in a way that, I guess the tzaddik can make sure that it's tiflei, right?
So what I'm saying, are you asking whether it's absolute or it's subjective, or the tzaddik is
no, I mean, it's not whether or not it's subjective or not. I'm saying is what we're looking for something right about the world, or something right about the thinking of the people living in it?
It's an interesting question. It's a very interesting question, but I don't want to go into it because it's just it's not. It's going to take us off the topic here. It's a very fascinating question. Okay, so let's say the Chidah. The Chidah says that if you're in Chutz La'aretz, you do Torah mitzvahs, you're supporting the Sar. So now we have a little bit of idea what that means. Here, let's talk about it. Let's take about America. Okay, who's the God of America? Yeah. Anyone else? No, I'm saying what concept? What?
Money.
Let's say money. Okay, money. Money. Let's say money is the God of America. Naniach, right? What does it mean? Money is the God of America? It means say that. Yeah. Pursuit of
money and God.
Pursuit of happiness. Let's say the pursuit of happiness. I don't know. Pursuit of happiness. Say that. Meaning.
There is a God of America?
Maybe not. That's what we're going to talk about. There's still a side of America. That's proof of what we're trying to figure out. Is it still Sarim? That's part of what the shir is about. But let's say there's a God of America, and the God of America is money. What does that mean? The God of America is money. What does it mean? It means money is a thing. Money as in power. Let's call it power, okay? Because money is already a derivative of power or whatever. Power is what the Americans really want. Yechezkel to do things. That's what they really value. In other words, that's what they see as being the most real, and that's what they define their own success by how much they're part of the story and participate in the abstract idea called power. Okay? So let's say that's their God. Okay. Now comes a Yid, and the Yid says, I don't know, I'm not into the God of America. I believe in Hashem, who's about a lot more than just power. Okay. But he does mitzvahs. Right? He does mitzvahs. Now, let's say one of those mitzvahs involves let's say creating ability for people to have parnasa, let's say. Big tzedakah. Okay? He creates companies, let's say. He creates a company that's mefinus 1,000 people. So he did tzedakah, right? He did tzedakah. Tzedakah doesn't mean power. Tzedakah means tzedakah. But in America, everything is looked at as power. And by him doing tzedakah, since America being America, where they think about everything as power, he is supporting and advancing the God of power, like it or not. He may not worship the God of power, but everything that happens in America, since all they think about is power, and that's what they're going to write about in the newspapers, how powerful he is, and look, power is working. Power is working because you see the guy has power, and therefore he's able to do such great things because he has power. They're not going to say he's able to do such great things because he has balance, or because he has a good sense of justice, or because of a good sense of kindness. Maybe they'll acknowledge that a little bit. But since the ikar focus is power, that's how his things are going to be perceived. So Mamela, he's advancing the narrative of power. The narrative of power is one of the 70 narratives of the 70 Sarim. So
someone whose God is power defines everything based on.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm saying it in an extreme way, but yeah.
That's the idea.
Yeah, that's the idea. That since that's his most absolute truth, that doesn't mean it's his God. It means that's what he thinks is the most real thing, and everything else is a tuffle to that. And this you could do, by the way. You could do this. You have to do this if you want to understand the concept of the Shem Sarim, Shem Kachanef, Shem everything. There's real ways to do this metaphysically, meaning what's the most real thing? You could say, let's say, being is the most real thing, Naniach, and then and then let's say power may be a very, very high up sar, because power is maybe very close to being. It's not being per se, but it's maybe all being has power. Okay? And then you might say eternity is also a very high up sar. What about money? Money is a little bit lower sar, because he's maybe below power. You see? And there's like whole charts of this. And that's why you could talk about who's sar. The Kabbalah talk about it. Certain nations have very great. Not that I ever no saw, but the idea that certain nations could have a very high up sar, the sar of Mitzrayim is going to say a grace is sar. That's what it means. It means they're pretty close to Hashem. And then you have to talk about how to combine the nations. This is what I talk about. We're going to get to this next year. Next year we're going to get to the questions. That there's a Shivim L'Shainis, and there's combining the nations. In order to combine the nations, you have to know what they stand for and how to put them all together. To know how to put them together, you have to know how the whole chart looks like. Yeah. What? Right. Yeah. Kailul. He's Kailul.
America's also.
Yeah. I don't know if America has a sar, and America is whatever. Yeah, I don't know if any nation has a sar anymore. So we sort of want to talk about it. I want to talk about that tonight a little bit, but just giving it as a marshal, just as a marshal. So in other words, it means like this. It means when a person's mahana Hashem. What does it mean to be mahana Hashem? It means Hashem is up to something. What's he up to? Up to everything he's doing. Let's call it he's up to Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah. Okay, that's what he cares about. That's his project. So when a person does certain mitzvahs that support that project and advance that project, he's Mahana Hashem. That's what we call Mahana Hashem. Giving pleasure to Hashem because you're doing what Hashem wants, what Hashem's interested in. What do you mean Hashem's interested in? What He's doing. Now, you could be doing something which is a mitzvah, but it's pulling the other direction because in the circumstances it's going to be understood and therefore advanced, right, with a different focus. And you know, by the way, does that mean you shouldn't do mitzvahs? I don't know, but you should. You should do mitzvahs. But it's a very, very scary thing. So the sefer says that it's a very most scary sefer I ever saw. He says worse than any averah is to do a mitzvah shalai ketikna. That's what he says. Garua mikol averah shebetorah is to do a mitzvah shalai ketikna. Now here's why. Because the guy's doing a good thing when he's giving tzedakah in America, let's say, right? Mela, guy's going to go kill people. He's not advancing any program. He's in Russia. Say that we have to get rid of him. We have to figure out how to deal with him. But if a guy's going to go do good things, and that's going to advance the wrong long-term story, then he's pulling in the wrong direction. Yeah, the Psalm are all good things. Yeah, the Malach alien. How could they not? Yeah, about it. They could be corrupted.
You're exaggerating one aspect. It's not saying a very
exaggerating a lot of things.
No. I'm just saying when you do a chesed in America, you're just exaggerating maybe that midah more than it deserves.
So you're overemphasizing.
That's
exactly.
much more dangerous than running away from it entirely because you understand that such a person is not participating.
Exactly. In a certain sense, right? In a certain, I mean, like this, right? In other words, in a certain sense, you say like this: if a guy does no chesed. A guy says, like, let's say a guy says like this: we are now in Golus, meaning so therefore we don't have that story of Das Hashem B'Shleimus. We don't understand it anymore. All we have is, let's say, these other mini stories. We have the American story. American story is not the right story. So I don't want to be part of any story. So I'm going to be inactive. I'm going to spend my life just being under the radar, making sure I'll try not to do evil, but I'm not going to try to produce and create. Right? That might be a good mahalach. The problem is that when you do that, we're not going to preserve Judaism. Right? The Torah doesn't tell us to do that, Lamaisa. Torah tells us do the mitzvahs in Chutz La'aretz and be mahana the sarim, and Hashem will work it out and figure out a way to make sure that it all works out. Right? Why? To stay in practice. That's what the Rashi says. This is Chazal say it's to stay in practice. It means to say, be'etzem, in terms of Hashem's long-term plan, in the near term, you could argue that the mitzvah is actually bringing things the wrong direction, but overall we can't have everyone stopping to do mitzvahs because then it's going to be forgotten. That's what Chazal is saying, right?
There's actually a deeper concept to what's Goliath means to say take all those cultures and all those sarim and be masakin it, bring it back to
right. So that's what we have to get to in the next year. Right? There's a purpose to Golus and there's something coming back all together. It's not just the end. Right? The end game is not to ignore Golus. 100%. We have to get to that. I saw a beautiful part. Someone said, I forgot who, that Chadish Yemenu Kekedem is a pasuk in Eicha. He says it's a lament. It's a kina. It's a kina that we can't imagine that we're going to get anywhere without erasing all of history. And of course, we don't want Chadish Yemenu Kekedem because what do you mean? The whole Golus was for naught. We're supposed to just go back. Obviously, there has to be a purpose, and we're supposed to be getting somewhere. I'm supposed to create something out of Golus. We'll get to that. Not in this year. Yeah, and the Shivim Sarim also have a place in the Pamali Shamayla. There's a Shariah talks about this. He says, what lost love of the Shivim Sarim are going to disappear. About Hashem's kingdom, it's not going to be complete. So this is all we have to talk about. Okay, so that's Ramban. Fine. So now the question for the shir is, is this true today? Is this true today? Meaning, again, we know exactly what Ramban means now. We have a very clear question. The story of Klal Yisrael, the Tzaddik Tovloi story, right? The story of Geula of Klal Yisrael is a story that reflects the Darchei Hashem. And therefore, says the Ramban, and that happens in Eretz Yisrael, right? That's where Hashem does. Again, let's try to be exact here. That's where events taken in the totality, the whole Jewish history. You asked, is it just Yitzhak's time? Or is it all of Jewish history? The answer is it's all of Jewish history, but the Jewish history that's Giloi, which takes place in Eretz Yisrael. Jewish history is the source for Das Hashem. Another source of Das Hashem is the totality of history. If someone could understand the whole universe, maybe including the future, he probably also has Das Hashem. But if we don't do that, if we start from a history, which probably everyone does, I think, and it's impossible maybe to completely remove yourself from history, the history that you want to be part of and thinking of and living in is the history of the Jewish people.
Eretz Yisrael, is it this because that's not going to be real?
Yeah, because it's our land. No, because it's our land, and okay, it's an interesting question. All right. Why is Eretz Yisrael the place for this? Fine. Why does it have to be the place
Yeah,
for
but
this?
also, I'm saying is if the idea is there's only certain, okay, maybe it's again the same question again. But is there only like
No, but that's good. That's very good.
Let's
That's
say
very good.
Is the Eretz Yisrael experience or the experience that we're choosing to focus on, say a certain dimension of human history, is that the one that yields the proper, or is what you're saying is that yields the proper intellectual
That's the
progress?
theory. That is the theory. Yeah.
And there's something proportionate about this story, or something
Right,
that's
exactly.
very unified.
Right.
That's not.
Right. Exactly. That this story is going to give you the right understanding.
You're saying that like if someone can, it would take meaning, at least in theory, the entirety of human experience, and maybe the entirety of theoretical human experience in order to, let's say, craft a complete.
Correct. And we don't have
understanding of
access to
things.
that.
We don't have that.
Right.
So this
So what do we
shrunk
do?
down-
Right.
And is this like the only is like the Yetzias Mitzrayim story, the shrunk into scale?
Yeah.
Is
Exactly.
that the
Yes.
idea?
Yes. That's exactly it.
Tanakh is also?
That's exactly it. That Yetzias Mitzrayim is a sliver of history that is supposed to accurately reflect the totality of history. It's an amazing thing.
Is Tanakh that also?
What do you mean?
Chosen story. I mean, a lot of more things happen in Christ. So
Could be. I'm not sure. That's an interesting question. I don't know. No, you're not asking to this.
Which?
Oh, that it's a sliver. No, I think okay, fine,
No, sure.
good.
No,
Okay.
it seems like even almost like envisioned as like a sped up history. So it's like very fast.
Interesting.
So maybe that's one of the ways that it becomes.
No,
Uh-huh.
I have a
Totality.
problem
Uh-huh.
with disproportionality of the
We have to
distribution.
in like in
The big
40
bang of
days.
this.
It's very
Interesting.
fast.
Right. Everything happens when it should, as it's needed for the story. Basically, it's like the story has to go there.
It does seem to be distributed very oddly.
What?
Let's say periods that we consider gullus or not gullus.
Yeah, that's interesting. Right, you see how there's
The
a lot.
end
There's a
chunk
lot
is
of thinking
huge,
about that.
randomly.
What?
Randomly, the last gullus is enormous, unless.
It's a big mystery. Yeah. Sort of unexpected, it seems. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever. I have a lot of theory about that. 1,000 years.
Who messed
Safe.
it up?
We did.
Yeah.
1,000 years after Bayesheni, B'Dal Levi said, "Let's go back," and we didn't listen. No.
That's. It's true. Would have been very.
It's right on time. Right on time. The cheshbon is on Nifla. Look at this. It's great stuff. I mean, yeah, whatever. We missed it. Anyways, I know we missed it. We're still waiting. 1,000 years later, we still have to catch up. Kids, so I wanted to figure out like this. So we have to figure out. So my question is like this: a very, very simple question. The Ramban that says that Eretz Yisrael is the place of Hashem, is that true today? So now what we're asking. What we're asking is it true in a certain sense that what happens to Klal Yisrael in Eretz Yisrael today, or the last 75 years, or whatever you want to call it, last 100 years, however you want to define it, and it could start anywhere. You could pick anywhere. It's all a question. Is that reflecting Darchei Hashem in a way that is not reflected anywhere else? Such that, would we say today, for example, living in Eretz Yisrael is K'mi sheyesh Laika, and living in Chutz La'aretz is not? And so there's two ways to approach the question. You could talk about the Metzias. There's two ways to answer this question. Either let's talk about the Gemara and Chazal and the Torah and see what the Torah says about this, or we could talk about the Metzias, right? So I'll just first briefly talk about the Torah, briefly, because the Torah is not clear on this. The Ramami Panu says explicitly the idea that when the Gemara says Hadar B'Eretz Yisrael K'mi sheyesh Laika and Hadar B'Chutz La'aretz K'mi she'ein Laika, the Ramami Panu says Hadar B'Eretz Yisrael B'Binyana is K'mi sheyesh Laika, and Hadar B'Eretz Yisrael B'Churbana is K'mi she'ein Laika, and Chutz La'aretz is always K'mi she'ein Laika. In other words, for sure, even though the Gemara says Dar B'Eretz Yisrael is K'mi sheyesh Laika, not Dar B'Chutz La'aretz, that's only when Eretz Yisrael is when everything's happening properly. The Makar, the pasuk, the Gemara learns out from a pasuk that David HaMelech says, "They chased me away from Eretz Yisrael." They said, "Leich Lavan Elohim," but that was the time of Hasharas HaShechina. So leaving Eretz Yisrael when there's Hasharas HaShechina, leaving Eretz Yisrael when everything happens perfectly, so that's when it's K'mi sheyesh Laika and Chutz La'aretz K'mi she'ein Laika. At the same time, the Gemara says, based on this thing of Yesh Laika, La'olam Yodor Eretz Yisrael, because in Eretz Yisrael is K'mi sheyesh Laika and Chutz La'aretz K'mi she'ein Laika, which is mashma even b'zman HaGolus, one should live in Eretz Yisrael because K'mi sheyesh Laika. Okay, I'm not going into that how we square that. That's true. Both of those things are true.
Might be potentiality.
Right, that's the answer. The potentiality for the K'mi sheyesh Laika and our connection. If we're all K'mi sheyesh Laika, what are we supposed to do about it? We're supposed to try to attach ourselves to our past and to our future by living in the place where there's a potentiality. That's the real answer. That's the
This is
answer.
where like Bavel comes in, I'm assuming, because
How
if
so?
it's better.
Yeah.
If somehow it's better,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
you could find an
right.
anomaly.
There you could have it
You
bepoil,
find-
and that's all you could have it in the koyach. Yeah, very interesting. Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So, but I don't want to go into that. I want to talk about, as we've been discussing last week, I want to talk about something that's real and moishech. Is it true that in Eretz Yisrael today, the Dachi Hashem are begotten? Okay? More than Chutz La'aretz. So let's talk about the Metzias. Talk about the Metzias. And this is why, Shkoyach to Rabbi Rosenberg, you sent me something earlier today, right?
Yeah.
Is that because today was the anniversary of the 6-Day War?
Is it?
Yeah. Okay. So what happened was like this. Oh, that's what was going on. What was going on was like this. I started thinking about this, yesterday. I didn't know it was the anniversary of 6-Day War. I figured it out today because all of a sudden, what? What started today? June 6th, I think.
English date.
I think so. I think so. Anyways, no English they don't.
English date.
Yeah. Okay. It gets on ice like this. So let's say, what if we want to know, like, if what happens at Yisrael is a Gilui of Dachi Hashem? So one way to ask that question would be to say, do Nisim happen in Eretz Yisrael? Have there been Nisim happening in Eretz Yisrael? Now, don't know to ask that question. We have to define Nisim.
Why are you saying Nisim?
Now do the two things. What?
You say Tzadik
Right.
the Rosh Hashanah is
Yeah. Okay. Right. So now,
is Nisim.
right. Well, what's your question?
Nisim can't happen in Chutz La'aretz.
Okay, so we have a lot of questions. Right. No. So this is right, 100%. There's a lot of questions over here. This itself opens up a lot of questions. Meaning, I'm not even sure if this is the right way to approach the question. To say, like, okay, is what's happening at Yisrael today last X amount of years? Is that, one second, is it a Gilui of Dachi Hashem? So one way to ask the question, maybe not, you might be right, would be to say, look, are there Nisim happening? Now, even Nisim has to be defined. I don't mean Nisim. The Rambam and guest says two types of Nisim. The Nisim that break nature, like Moshe Rabbeinu's staff turning into a snake, and the Mayim turning into dam. And there's another type of Nes, which is within nature. And what makes that a Nes, says the Rambam, either it was predicted by a Navi, or something extraordinary happens, like the Arba Eloi Haya Lefan of Kamayu, or the regularity. Like whenever you do good, it rains, and whenever you do various, it doesn't. That would also be called an isomophis. So we're talking about the third kind of isomophis, meaning do things or the second kind, do extraordinary things happen in Eretz Yisrael that indicate something. You have to understand, every time we talk about an isomophis, a Nes proves nothing. You have to have a theory, right? What does a Nes prove? Nothing. Say that something weird happened. Every time you interpret an Nes, you're interpreting in light of some sort of theory you have, and that gets to Shmuel's question: how much are we inputting to the interpretation of events, and how much are the events impressing themselves on us? And that's an interesting psychological question, and because I don't really care about that, because the fact is the answer is somewhere in between, right? The fact is events do impress us, and because we think about them in a certain way, and there's one big mush over here which we can't extricate ourselves from. That's human nature. No, but I want to know whether the events in Eretz Yisrael are such kinds of events that serve as oisus u'moifsim, the things that impress us in certain ways and should impress us in certain ways, right? This is my approach. Granted, as Nachum pointed out, maybe this is not the right way to approach it, but this would be an avenue to approach, right?
Yeah, but only insofar as the are truths that don't vary as much by experience, right?
Right.
And in some sense, maybe those we would at least be inclined to think are more important.
You would be inclined to think those are more important, and that's why, and that's like we keep on saying, the purpose of the shiurim, which we believe that next year I will really get to this, is this tension. If we care about the truths that are invariable, right? So why is the Torah so concerned with history? Back in the beginning of the Torah, Yitzis Mitzrayim, as being what the Torah is all about, and this is what we're trying to figure out: why should we go back to Eretz Yisrael? If we discover Hashem and we know Hashem and we know we understand Hashem, can we know Him anywhere? What do we need certain kind of events for, right? That's what you're asking.
Right, unless we're trying to understand history in a non-contingent way, meaning like not like Hegel, but maybe a little bit like saying that there's an equally uncontingent idea of history, and it just maybe seems contingent to us, but it doesn't seem that way.
It seems like that from the Nevi'im. That might be. You have to
history is non-contingent.
Yes.
But I was just thinking, like, maybe that's why looking at a Nes is thing, because it's less controversial, less potentially subject on your interpretation, because it's so.
That's the question, right?
So, it's more or less
right.
Subject to your understanding of it.
Well, it's in terms of its maybe extraordinariness, but in terms of what does it tell you?
The interesting thing.
What does it tell you? It could tell you Hashem's on our side. It could tell you He's testing us and the sun, whatever, which is the same sun, right? So you always have to bring a theory to it. You can't really avoid the theory. But at least we could talk about the first question: are there Nisim? Are there Nisim happening in Eretz Yisrael? Right?
And sorry, the
I don't believe in
categories-
that. I don't believe
the
that theory, by the way.
categories
I'm just
again
saying.
were
I'm saying
one-
you always have to. It always needs interpretation, right? I mean, the pasuk says that Hashem can make an ace to test you. The,
Right, but
pasuk says
there-
the
there are
concept that
certain-
an ace can test you is possible.
Right.
You
That
have
to
to
me,
go with the rules.
What?
There are
Right.
rules. There are rules.
Right,
that I
right.
understand.
Exactly. But that's what I'm saying. Right. So in other words, but that's my point was, the Metzias never tells you anything without bringing
rules.
some rules, right? Ways of thinking, which are we have to figure out where to get the ways of thinking for the Torah. Fine. Otherwise, of course.
right. Okay. I'm sorry. The different possible nisim were, the responsiveness of a certain maybe unexpected, like the regularity of things.
Irregularity things or
Tzad
unexpected
v'tayvei.
victories, or victories that were extraordinary. So I learned, thank you for the Makairis. I started looking into, I knew that after the 6 day war, a lot of people said they were Nisim, a lot of Gedolim said they were Nisim. And Rabbi Rosenberg graciously sent me a whole list of Makairis. And I knew about Yechezkel Levenstein. It was very interesting. What he said about, you tell me if I'm missing something. After the 6 day war, he told people, it's not normal. He was talking about the Nisim and the Nefelos that Hashem did for us. And he was telling people in Punovich, I think, he was telling me in Punovich, they have to thank Hashem twice a day.
You say it together, you can see some time.
Because you have to thank Hashem twice a day. Why? Because Yirmiyah Hanavi said, the day is going to come. V'lo yoymuchim, we're on brachas, I forgot brachas. V'lo yoymuch chai Hashem asher helas b'nei Yisrael me'etz Tzrayim, ki im chai Hashem asher helas b'nei Yisrael me'etz Tzefayna. Right? It's time to talk about Lo Yishataki Tzis Tzrayim U'Koyim, but we have to talk about the next schooler, Yechezkel Levenstein, Mashkiach Panovich, Tzaddik, Agoyin HaTzadik Yechezkel Levenstein. And apparently he said it's like Yitzis Mitzrayim, and I think he said it's Yemos HaMashiach.
That's for sure. He said it's like it's
Right.
I'm not sure.
He said it's Yemos HaMashiach. He wrote it's Yemos HaMashiach.
Mashiach.
He said it's Yemos HaMashiach, which I think is Pasha because Ein Bid Adam Hazeh Yemos HaMashiach Shibud Malchus. We don't have Shibud Malchus anymore.
Halach Yishmor.
Yeah, the Rambam says like that. We don't have Shibud Malchus. Not Shubid. Don't have Evid anymore. And also the Tanchuma says that in Bavel they're not going to have Chevlei Mashiach Limois HaMashiach. So from which I infer that the Chevlei Mashiach happened within Yemos HaMashiach. Because it goes like this, and this is talking about how history worked. First, it's not going to be Shibud Malchus anymore, right? So there's going to be freedom. Once human beings are free, that's when the real wars are going to start. Wars of ideology, like the World War II. I mean, it used to be no one was free. Say this, so you had your karka, and a bunch of serfs, and we could fight with each other for a little land. Those were the Kleina Milchamas. Once human beings realize that we're free, which is that's in the whole ikar message of the Torah is Geula from Cheres from Mitzrayim, different shmuz. Why that's the case, but freedom is what the whole humanity is tending towards, complete Cheres. And once that starts catching on, that's when people struggle the most because it's very difficult to be free because you have to start contending with, well, what do I really believe? What do I actually stand for? And that's when you can really destroy the world based on ideology.
And
Those are Chevlei Mashiach, I think.
And as
Right?
you're free, you're
There's units
better.
of freedom.
Yeah.
And as you get free, you're better at manipulating the world to make
Yeah.
yourself more damaging when you're fighting about what freedom does for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but you also have more power to make the world
Yeah, you go
Taif.
use it for good. But
right,
yeah.
right,
At first,
Right.
I don't use it for bad.
exactly. So Beketzer, we are the Yemos HaMashiach. It's Pasha.
And it's
it's
easy to
Daiti.
understand how in a world, let's say, without these things, how power very easily becomes like a Nietzschean god, right? Because
In a world of freedom.
yeah,
Yeah.
You see it in other.
power definitely takes a different shape.
Yeah.
It's not even power for it's power for its own sake. Meaning, insofar as you're a serf, it's power for the sake of furthering, let's say, my well-being. Or
I know, and I have a feeling that even the
When
king
you're
of the
free, you can't
serfs,
do that.
even the king of the serfs didn't have the same freedom.
No.
Right?
No.
I'm not sure why,
No,
but
because he's
he's
just not
just
a
part
serf.
of right.
He's defining himself.
He's
in
probably not a
relation to the
serf.
serfs,
Right. His whole avoid is that he shouldn't
he's
become a
the king of
serf.
them.
He has to make sure not to become a serf. Like
Right.
that's his whole freedom is ich bin nicht kein serf.
Yeah.
He's not
I
really,
think it's
you
a little
know.
more dangerous when you take away all the.
Right. All of a sudden, a man realizes I'm anything. I am God. I mean, I have become whatever. You see when they made the bomb, right? You know, destroyer of worlds. I'm saying that's a man realizes what he is.
Sick of him, yeah.
What? Man realizes what he is, then he's taka becomes B'Tselem Elikim, or he B'Tselem Elihim Acherim if he doesn't have Das Hashem, and that's when he becomes really dangerous and doesn't
Yeah,
have the
Chavad
Mashiach.
the Mashiach Mitzvah, yeah.
Is the idea of Dafkanism or is the idea of Yad Hashem?
What?
The idea of Dafkanism. or
Okay,
Yad
there's
Hashem?
different words you can use for it. Yeah.
If we talk about Yad Hashem, then we
Hashgacha.
open up a Hashgacha,
Yeah.
then we open up a whole new window.
Yeah.
Which really like the idea of Israel is. There's a whole book about this from Shmuel Yo.
Yeah.
How Israel is leading in every single all the things Israel's leading the world in.
Yeah.
In such a short time. It also shows the Yad Hashem.
Yeah. The Rambam called that an ace. I'm using that interchangeably. I
you
mean,
don't have to only come into wars. It's really
yeah. Right. There's much more than that. And the emes is like this. So the emes is that this taka sugi gedola, meaning a sugi gedola. What does the Torah call a ice or meifis or an ace? and whether we have to look at things that happened in the last whatever amount of years, like I said, you can say 100, you can say 70, you can say, you know, and are these, does he have Hashem Oisum Manifest? I think it's very, very important. And Yechezkel Levenstein, the tzaddik, took this very seriously, and he's right. I'm telling you, people have said this to me, and I let this thing, okay, you know, Chai Hashem, we have to say, you know, averah, we have to start thanking Hashem for this geula, Kilu Yitzis time, and I laughed because you're being a great Tziyoni, but you know, Maisa, he took it very seriously, Yechezkel, and he came to this conclusion, and it's a sugya gedol of atzuma. Now, there's a little bit of a history here. Why this kind of talk? It wasn't just Yechezkel. I just quoted him because he was the most hyperbolic and superlative about it, but there were Chaim Shulevitz, and you could tell us all that. Shlomo Volba has a mind about it. The reason why I think, and it's a little bit parenthetically, historically, why this in Yeshiva Welt, this is not such the raid. Rav Shach, after, right, I think you wrote about this, I read this someplace else also, after Yechezkel was nifter, yes, that Rav Shach gave a shmooze, he toned it down. Rav Shach didn't like this marriage routine, Torah and Zionis, let's say, and he really made this pirud. But imagine what the Torah world would look like if that would have been the Mahalach. Very interesting.
Isn't the best
but big Gedolim, Chaim Shulevitz, many big Gedolim said there were nisim and if I was happy. I'm happy to picking the war, of course. Yeah, Shach himself, screw up. Even right. So Bekitzer, so this is a big deal. Nisim are happening. It's a very, very big deal. And what do we have to make of that, right? And now we'll talk about why do we care in terms of living. We'll get to that soon. Yeah, go ahead.
Isn't there a good argument against this? Is what you just said, that history doesn't work so fast. So maybe like you don't know. You might be looking at very small sliver of history and deciding much more than you should.
Yeah, I mean, so that gets to the question.
Possibly 200 years, they'll be like, okay, whatever. No, it doesn't mean it's wrong. Maybe it'll be like.
No, it's a very interesting question you're asking. So you're saying even when the Torah says something in the Oisum Manifest, maybe the Torah is only saying that in hindsight. I mean, maybe.
Fine, that Torah is telling you that's what it is. I'm just saying, go now.
Right.
The 6 Day War happened how many years afterwards? Usually, history does not work that fast.
Say this. Let's hear a good question. When would they create an Eretz Chanukah?
When
did they start saying Shas? When did they say Shas for Chanukah? No, I'm serious. No. That's a very interesting question.
They didn't say it about the Nace.
When did they say what?
When they establish a kingdom. I don't know.
Fine. Okay. So, but I'm saying we have a very good data point without using Torah Shabbat and Nevuah. We have a very good data point for what do we consider miraculous enough to say, look, something important happened that we have to note as something important. What? No. You see?
Your definition is true. But
right.
I'm just saying, but the point is like.
Chanukah
would be different. Let's say the way the Rambam has it's like, oh, you create a kingdom. So something very concrete.
Okay, fine. So
whereas,
that's your answer.
Like the 6 Day War itself, I'm just trying to say like, the premise of the share is that history has to be looked at in a very broad sense. And
okay, right.
I don't agree with this argument, but the argument would be is that this is too small of a sample size.
Maybe you're right. Really maybe right. Good. There's a lot of questions to ask that you could ask about the whole way of thinking, of looking for nisim. But I think it's a very important sugya, and I want to study it myself. I plan to.
It's a small thing. But when you're seeing a pattern from Hashem, it's not just the 6 Day War. It's a certain consistent pattern.
You would say it's coming from making a state, which is also very concrete.
Right. There's
something concrete here too.
I know that's a problem.
Meaning and direction, right? Meaning we don't know why. There could be all sorts of reasons for why there might be a pattern. Maybe it's sefer achra, right?
That's when we get to know.
I'm not saying whatever. I'm just saying is you do have to validate it by outside.
Yeah, but the idea is if you see a certain pattern of Mahalach, which is not the standard,
and something's at work here.
Something is at work here, and if you see that's just
and maybe
it's also a good idea.
Maybe it's Kaichus right? We don't.
So we could discuss that.
Right. Yeah.
If you also think that the first part of it was
building up with
good,
Hashem.
It's nice to use this as a sign that you're doing good things. It's not a matter of like,
to be consistent.
I thought it's bad. Must be it's good because of this.
Right.
I thought it was good.
Right.
Something good happened, and it validated.
That gets to the point. Basically, the same point is that you cannot. There's no Havana of Nisim without theory either. Probably. I think it's. But it requires a lot of work.
Maybe why Hanukkah, possibly a reason why we make it be about the nace, but it's clearly not about the nace of the light itself. Is that it's like something on top of it after the whole thing. We feel very good about it. It's like okay, fine, say it, whatever. But it's obviously without that.
It's really not.
Celebrate Nisim.
I don't care so much about that as you do. You care about that a lot. Not everyone else does.
What White Swan?
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Nisim might really be subjective. Like there might be a very subjective component to this.
That's fine, but then again, we're crutching. I find that like sometimes as like maybe the empirical theories start to like flower a little bit, we end up crutching a lot on it being approached with the proper conceptual strategy. And at some point, you end up reinforcing this conceptual strategy so much they can operate outside of in almost all empirical scenarios.
I don't know about that. Okay. That's
the
interesting
thing is,
question.
as we allow for
Okay,
more and more
listen.
variety within the empirical portion,
Right.
the more we're
Right,
reinforcing
but you understand
the necessity of the appropriate
I know,
conceptual strategy.
100%. But what I'm arguing for tonight is a very fundamental idea, which is that if you want to be part of the Torah, then you're forced to do that. That's what Ramban is saying, right? In my interpretation, that Das Hashem happens in Eretz Yisrael. What he's saying is that the events, at least not for today. Forget about whether today.
We have to say very strong things about the events.
Say that. Okay. Fine.
Things that are so strong that it can even, let's say, concepts that are deeply unrefined or flawed in a significant way. These circumstances, the scope of interpretation on them is narrow enough that we.
Okay, that's fine.
Is that I don't quite understand exactly how right, because
I'm not sure that's right. You're saying a certain interpretation of the Torah. I'm arguing with you about the Torah. When the Torah says it's Yetzias Mitzrayim, it makes Midas Hashem.
right.
How does that work?
Right. So are we saying is that this empirical presentation is powerful enough that even inappropriate or incomplete conceptual approaches become modified to the content of thought? Meaning that even if the thinking is improper, the thought will rectify the thinking, right? Or the container will take the shape of the contained, right? But the more we allow for the contained to have ambiguity and for it to be possibly approached wrong, then you have to strongly reinforce the container, right? And then say more things about the container that invalidate the container.
100%. I hear you. That's why I focused on Nisim, because since there's a real concept in the Torah called the Hashem Manifest, and that has certain specific rules, at least the Rambam makes them, or we can approach the Torah and say, what does the Torah...
like these
No, first of all, he loves the second type. He doesn't like the first type. He doesn't like breaking nature. The second type he loves.
Oh, okay.
No, he really does.
Right. Okay.
So, but again, you understand what I'm saying? That's a very important point. Okay, Shmuel is raising a point, but kids say, how do we know anything? Say that, Elamai, you want the vets to... No, I didn't mean like that. No, I was just saying it Bekitzer.
Well,
you're saying... I was trying to say Bekitzer. Shmuel was saying like this. You're going to use the events to start molding the way you think, then you're going to become one of these people who does awful things in the name of Zionism, right? Because, God is telling me what to do, because God is leading me. Elamai, we don't want to do that, because we're bringing a certain something way of looking at to the table. So how much are we bringing to the table before we look at it? And if we are bringing so much to the table, then aren't we deciding what to look at?
Doesn't
and then
matter.
what do we look? Right. So my answer to your question is like this. My answer to that is like this. I'm learning Torah here, and I see in the Torah what mostly called an ice or a ma'ifus or an ace. That should have some definition. I know the Rambam, for example, gives some definition, and that's something we should be able to look at other events and say, is this what the Torah, what the Nevi'im would call an ice or a ma'ifus or an ace? Would Chazal call this an ace? Would they say Baruch Shas Nisim V'Avisin Makom Hazeh? Would they make a bracha? Right? These are Torah questions, and therefore there's got to be some mahalach there. And again, all I'm assuming is belief in the Torah. You see, I'm assuming belief. I'm not saying let's read history a certain way. I'm saying the Torah teaches us that. Right?
There's rules.
Exactly.
It was negay. Just to bring out the concept a little more. It was negay la'alacha. All the yeshivas after the 60 wars said halal. They all said
so you get the halal, right?
And this anyone that said halal obviously understood that it has nothing to do with the spracha, right?
Once
you say halal, the idea over here is that everyone understood it was accepted by everyone except for one Catholic council. Everyone was unilaterally accepted that this was a Yad Hashem L'Toiva.
Well, the fact that they got saved was good. Why does it have to?
But it was consistent.
Wouldn't you say also that the best way should somewhat resemble the Hashem Manifest of the Torah, which is in Navis? Assuming you're in the States about this, you're going to write something about this. Basically, obviously we wouldn't predict it. Would we have Ki'ilu predicted it? Meaning, say it's like people said something like we predict good things will happen, good outcomes, right? So basically, now
where's the Navi? Where's the Navi? Yes, where's the Navi? Shouldn't there be a Navi?
I'm saying even out of Navi, you could try to mimic that in the sense where people said that doing this will have good outcomes, and there were good outcomes. So now it means something. Now maybe they're correct in what they said. What caused the good outcomes?
Yeah. I think that's why the Navi, the function of the Navi in Nisim. Yeah, I think he gives it a framework that it fits into.
Because he understands the world. I'm sure the right he understands the world. He cannot predict how the world comes out. So in a very general sense, a Chacham, let's say, could say whatever.
Maybe. Right.
That's enough to say hell.
Right. I don't know if a chacham could say it because I don't think a chacham does it.
What if someone who understands vaguely the world can say in a vague way, good outcomes.
Problem is vague doesn't work. What does vague do for us?
What do you mean?
Right? Vague is a bad explanation.
My question is always like this.
No, but you see, that's why I'm getting back to Oisomifis. The Maisa, you ask him, there's a thing called Oisomifis and Ace.
Yeah.
That's why I chose that.
Oisomifis is significant question. Somewhere on the spectrum. To me to say, I'm not a radical rationalist or an empiricist, or that necessarily either of those approaches are even so kosher. I don't even like the words. I like to go older.
What's the reality of this nace? That's what he's putting this question.
Why it happened?
So
we know that it helped us.
Everyone agrees that experience not only is the
No, he's
some
questioning
sense
it.
of it, right?
He's
Right.
questioning
Certain
it.
experiences,
Right.
there's no think about things in different ways.
Right.
Even experiences of thinking are
It can't.
experiences.
There's no
Right.
good to it.
Now we have
That's
also
what he's questioning.
Number one is even if it is from
and no one's going to say so.
and even if
The empirical aspect matters, but everyone agrees that
he's saying that
an
it could be
an
that
experience
the reason why
produces a
war is
thought.
because
Right.
of that. It could be any of those
So
reasons. It could be because
the question is
lost.
always to
Socrates is a
me
bad
like
thing.
Nace is
Right.
just
Socrates
giving
is a bad
more
thing, which is
empirical
crazy.
strength. There's certain experiences.
Is a good
Every
thing.
experience
No,
can
no,
change the way I
no.
think, but this I'd
That's a
say has
bad
a
thing.
privileged
If you think it's not that
position
people have
in
money
In
Right.
changing. That's what I think an ace really is about. An ace is a banner, an Oisomifis,
Right, but I think
meaning
that certain needs
it
to
does
me in my
something.
mind cause me incredibly dangerous.
Why?
Because it can alter the way I
Money's not
think.
good for it. You don't say thank
My
you.
approach is flawed enough from the onset. This may change the way I think and bend it, but it may be the wrong thing. What's the same thing in the right direction?
Okay, that's a very interesting question.
No, but it's not-
I would assume that
That's not true.
that's an anti-biblical thought you just
So
said,
let's
right?
no, unless you're saying that there's something that's deeply inherent in these things.
That's
It's
what
willing to
the
be
Torah-
radical
that's
in
what
your
the Torah-
own. But then we have to understand that we don't even think about the Nisim will think it will make us think.
The fact that you got something right now on the
As you think, but we have to figure out if it's an ace, or maybe we have to figure out if it's an ace. Maybe not. Maybe not. You see, maybe it's just an ace.
No,
Or you see, maybe
this will change the way you think.
Right, that is-
If this is an empirical-
Right. I want to say it.
unique
That's very
empirical
important.
properties.
Right, 100%. That's very important.
I have no child.
Right, it's very important. Okay, boys, I want to, if I can ask Ahel to please, yeah, because my special is being recorded. Okay, the mice like this. We have to ask Ahel. We'll talk afterwards.
Win the money, I would never get
Let's talk afterwards. We'll talk afterwards. Ahel is welcome to talk afterwards as much as I want. I want to try to finish up. Just I want to raise one thing Shmuley raised, which is very true. It's also very possible that the whole question of, let's say, approaching and saying, is this Oisor Moifis, and let's define it, is not the way Oisor Moifis work. Oisor Moifis work by affecting us, and therefore, if it affects you, it's nice. That's why I said before it might have a subjective component, because an Oisor Moifis, see, Ois means a sign,
It's an empirical, meaning.
but it does something. Right? No, it actually does something to you.
Experience.
Say that, but it's unique for you, meaning it does something to you. Another person doesn't do anything to you.
So this I don't see why.
Oh,
it would
that's
be
what
the
you're
case.
saying.
No, if it's an ace, then it should have unique properties. That's why not subjective, but unique empirical properties.
Okay.
A person, let's say, there are things that we see. Let's say we identify as even like privileged empirical experiences. Let's see, trauma, right?
Okay.
Buzzword. This is trauma, meaning
Fine.
that certain events totally demolish the way that you thought
Okay.
before. They recreate your thinking
Right.
patterns.
Right.
Is an ace just this?
Okay, right. So if an ace is
But
just
it's
that.
not subjective. This
No,
is
but
just this is just a feature
No, but
of
if an ace
experience.
is just that, no, but once an ace is just that, then the question of should we, is this isomorphism or not? It's a very weird
It's a highly
question
relevant
because
question.
right, it's a relevant question. It's irrelevant. If
Totally irrelevant.
Right, if an ace is just a trauma, but a good trauma, then say there. Some people were traumatized by Eretz Yisrael, and let's say, and hopefully in a good way, meaning good trauma, it made them into better Jews. They did tshuva, or they started thinking about Hashem. And say there. So for them it is nice, by definition. And for us it's not. That's one approach to the question I raised of whether these events are nisim, and I don't have the answers to these. I wasn't planning on exploring this because it's a sugya gedol. It just occurred to me that we're talking about the Ramban, and want to know, okay, is Hashem now in Eretz Yisrael today? Is Hashem being mizgala today? Which you'll find, let's say, Shon Valbo, I think in his mind, we talked about Hashem is being mizgala, he's being showing us this is how he's being mizgala through the Hashgacha. This is a very, very important question. And one way to look at that is to say, perhaps one way, everyone raised very good points, that one way to look at that would be to say, is this an isomorphism? Now, who cares? Okay, so who cares? Let's say Hashem is being mizgala in Eretz Yisrael today. So, okay, so why should I be there? Why should I be, so is that a reason to go there? Should I, am I interested in going there? So first we spoke about this before. This is the point we spoke about before, that if you understand the giluyim that are happening at Yisrael, that means you are makar as bayrei by experiencing what's happening at Yisrael. And again, it's not black and white. It doesn't mean you have to be there. If you read about it, and you identify with it, it's your cousins, it's your brothers.
It's a much shrunken world.
Right, it's a much shrunken world. That's what we have to get. That's a big thing we're getting to. In Bichlal, space doesn't matter anymore. I'm there, I'm not there. I'm still experiencing it, right?
My son 3 times.
Exactly. So yeah. I mean, like I have a shaila about tearing kriya. There's 2 reasons not to tear kriya. Whatever. It's I'm halacha, not la halacha even, not la halacha. I could be in Eretz Yisrael in 15 hours from now. It's not a big deal to get to it. It's not, the whole mechik is different. Plus, you could watch it. You could watch the Kaisa live, right? So, and maybe I did watch the Kaisa live. There's a party from Kriya, you Chayiv in Kriya, whatever. All these shots. The point is that just bring out that it's a small world, and being there is not. I'm not focusing necessarily on being there, but conceptually being shaykh to Eretz Yisrael. What does being shaykh to Eretz Yisrael do for you? It makes you be makir as bayrei. Okay, it makes you be makir as bayrei. Meaning, according to the way we're looking at it, if you take these events and study them, and they use them to add to your understanding of Hashem, it's an amazing thing, right? A guy says, I want to know Hashem, so what should he study? So there's two answers. Study everything without overweighting anything more than anything else. Where do I start? Is that even possible to do? What about the things that didn't happen yet? What about the other worlds and whatever, right? Or don't have to study everything, just study Jewish history. So we have Darchei Hashem, right? Jewish history as it's presented in the Torah, let's say. Should he also study modern Jewish history? Or is that just big black hole, like we'll tell him the Hester was, mostly? Again, like I wasn't pointing out, not the fact that there was Galus is also part of history, and we have to understand why did Hashem make Galus. But all the things that happened within Galus, don't look at that. You're not going to learn much from that, right? You're not going to learn a lot from. You're not going to see Yad Hashem in the Inquisition and the Crusades, whatever. I'm saying, of course, you have tzaddikim, yichidim, whatever. But you want to talk about the totality of Jewish history from the last 100 years. Now you can start looking at it and start reading it and saying this adds to your understanding of Hashem. And therefore, what? Again, now we get to serving Hashem. That means, and the more a person is shaykh to that, if a person understands that, understands how that's working, understands what's being revealed through history, let's call it Chesed Tzedakah Mishpat, and then he could see how he could promote that and be a part of that. Then he's Yesh Le'alaika. Then he is the Yesh Le'alaika. Why do you want to be Yesh Le'alaika? I'm not doing religious things. I'm saying like this. It's a very simple thing. If you believe that there's some story that Hashem is doing through the Jewish people, that He wants to do, an important story that He wants to write, and He's using the Jewish people for that. So, firstly, you have an opportunity to be part of something that's truer and more real than anything else that you're going to be busy with. So anything that you're going to be, anything that you're going to devote your life to, you want to make it shaykh to this story of Klal Yisrael. And more than that, if you can figure out how to make your life work within that story and to contribute to that story, so you're mamish eternalizing yourself. You're making that your actions are eternal, are important. And the highest level will be that you should earn hashgacha. And you should become a Navi in the Spitz, right? Because if you know what Hashem is doing, you understand what Hashem is doing, and you're working with Him, so you're going to get hashgacha. It means you'll see success in what you're doing. So this is the biggest prize. So the question of is Hashem today in Eretz Yisrael is a very important question. And if someone determines that yes, Hashem is active today in Eretz Yisrael, as in, again, to clarify, that right now what's happening is Hashem revealing Himself through the Jewish people, then that's an amazing story to be a part of. You should want to be part of that story because that's more true, because that's the most true thing that you know. And that gets to, Shmuel's question of, well, there's all these uncontingent truths, and why are we so busy with historic truths? That's a very important question. But I'm saying now, at least from the way the Torah looks at things, it's all about historic realities. And if there's a historic reality that we can define, and then we should want to be a part of it. We should want to be part of it to internalize ourselves and to be contributing to the most important thing that we could see is happening in the world today. Okay? The question that we're going to get to, and this gets to the overarching issue of this series, and this we're going to talk about next year, is that big question, which is, okay, so if the purpose of history, even Yetzias Mitzrayim, is so that Asidat Sosh Bashpalim Kuloi, and all the world is supposed to know Hashem, and all these Sarim that we spoke about, they might all be gone by now. The Yitzhak David is bottle. All the nations were mixed up together. There is a purpose in Galus. We already spread Torah to the whole world, as Ram said, so things are not so black and white as I described it. So what do we need this story for? In other words, what we just talked about tonight was a fact that it seems the Dvarim Noitim, but I would like to really think about this and study it. Dvarim Noitim, that there's a story happening in Eretz Yisrael last 100 years, which is a story that is similar and can be added to Tanakh, as it were. He had a Navi, he would write this story. He would write this. He would write this like a Particularism.
It's actually written in Tanakh. If you
You're very good. No, yeah, no. It's 100% true. I mean, if you actually, if you step back and think, you realize that everything's happening. No, everything happening like Tanakh, so like Chazal said. Even the prediction.
Kids and grandparents jumping, dancing in the streets.
Yeah, even the prediction of, let's say, Shita Alfi Shnin, it's really amazing to me, the fact that 6,000 years, Chazal said 2,000 years ago, they said 6,000 years, and we see, everyone knows in 200 years from now, things are going to have to be different. I mean, something's going on with the world in terms of the progress, in terms of what's going, where we're headed to. It's amazing how things happen. But let me just finish this. Let me finish up. I would love to hear everything out. I just want to finish up. The point is like this. The point is that if we have something, so here we're talking about a fact, that there's a story happening in Eretz Yisrael with Am Yisrael today, that's a continuation and similar to those stories that are the Yesod of Das Hashem. The question, the theoretical question we're going to talk about next time, theoretical but also as applications of practice, is what do we need a story? What do we need the story to happen again? The story happened once already, and we're bringing that story to the whole world. Are we now just replaying it, and we're going back? We're doing another Yetzias Mitzrayim, but I thought something's supposed to change, and we see that various things have changed. The whole world is now part of the story. The world is a smaller place. So why would there be this repeat of a story? And how does that have any ramifications for how we're supposed to engage with it, if at all? Okay.
What do you hold with story?